Well, good morning, everyone, and apologies for that little bit of a delay, technical challenges, which at this point we're all quite familiar with living in this bizarre virtual COVID world. But good morning and welcome. My name is Rebecca. I'm with RBC's Commercial Bank here in the Waterloo region, and it's my real pleasure to be your MC today. We are so pleased that you have decided to join us online for our annual Salute to Women in Business event. Our mission is to celebrate all the brilliant and talented women who are contributing their talent to our business community here in Cambridge. More and more women are continuing to take their rightful place in the world of economics and healthcare and corporate leadership, and we believe that this is something that should be recognized and celebrated. The Cambridge Chamber strives to provide programming that inspires women to overcome any challenges, which is why the stories you're about to hear today from these three extraordinary women really bring our theme to life of determination, bravery, and hope. Joining us today are true advocates for women as well, the Chamber board members and Sarah Hughes from Energy Plus Inc., Rena Hawkins from H4 Logistics Inc., and Erica Tenenbaum from RBC Dominion Securities. As well, we've got some of our local representatives from the City of Cambridge. We have Mayor Catherine McGarry, Councillor Donna Reid, Councillor Pam Wolfe, Councillor Nicholas Ermetta, and Councillor Mike Devine. And from the region of Waterloo, we have Councillor Helen Jowett, Councillor Carl Kiefer, and Regional Chair Karen Redman. We also have Brian May, our Cambridge Member of Parliament, and Mayor Sue Foxton from North Dumfries Township. At this time, I'd also like to recognize our signature sponsors, Hefner Lexus, JD Development Group Corporation, and Rogers Communications. And also a special thank you to all of our other sponsors today. So our gold sponsors are Cambridge Pool Supplies, RBC Dominion Securities, thank you, Erica Tenenbaum, and You Gotta Shop Here. Our silver sponsors are the Cambridge Memorial Hospital, the City of Cambridge, Collaborative Structures Limited, Farm Mutual, Graham Matthew, Paul M. Mann Professional Corporation, Pavey Law LLP, and RLB. Our silver sponsors continued into page 2 here. We've got our Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Your Neighborhood Credit Union, and 93.7 Faith FM. Our bronze sponsors are Conestoga College, Dean Group, H4 Logistics, Industrial Rigging and Supply, Precision Resource Canada, TD Commercial Banking, and Waterloo Regional Police Association Rec and Banquet Hall. And so now we know no virtual event is complete without the socials. So here you've got us, please tag us using whatever social media platform you love. Tag us today so that we can continue to amplify and follow this conversation. But a big important note on this platform itself, if you've got any questions for the speakers today, you're going to use the Q&A box. The chat box is going to be exclusive for networking with other attendees. So questions go into the Q&A box, comments and networking, those go into the chat box. So with that sort of covered off, at this time, I'm going to invite Cindy Cormier from Rogers Communications to bring greetings, if possible.
Okay, I think we've got it. Technical difficulties. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Cindy Cormier, Director of Major Accounts for Southwestern Ontario. I'm delighted to be here today to represent Rogers as we celebrate the achievements of women in business. I remember my first meeting. It was early in my career. It was actually at a Chamber of Commerce. I was the only woman in the room and around the board table, and that was actually not unusual. It's so important for women to celebrate each other and to teach the next generation of business women and entrepreneurs to be leaders and encourage and support each other. It's really important that we have women in the funnel for the future leadership roles too. We need to do a better job of letting young women know that more is so much possible. This is one of my favorites from Tracy Ellis Ross. I'm learning every day to allow the space between where I am and where I want to be to inspire me and not terrify me. The guest speakers we'll be hearing from today are a huge inspiration. They show that through resilience and perseverance, anything is possible. Ladies, thank you for sharing your stories with us today.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. And if you are like me, you're still figuring out this new version of Zoom. And it looks like a lot of our participants are learning the same thing. So we're going to struggle through together, but thanks for your patience. And before we dig in with our next speaker, I'd like to take just a few moments to speak about why we're doing this and acknowledge and extend a sincere thank you to our dedicated healthcare workers for working so hard and trying to help us all stay safe in this community. And in particular, Cambridge Memorial Hospital's interim chief of staff, Dr. Winnie Lee, for her tireless efforts and leadership during this tough time. Our Salute to Women events continue to support breast reconstruction at Cambridge Memorial Hospital. Community dollars fund 100% of the equipment and technology in our hospital and are crucial for ensuring that the best care possible is delivered close to home. This equipment and technology have created opportunities for all sorts of medical advancement. For example, very recently, an all-female surgical team led by Dr. Catherine Sawa performed the first innovated deep inferior epigastric perforator, DIEP, free flap breast reconstruction in the region of Waterloo, the first one ever. And this relatively new technique gives patients the chance at restoring sensation and feeling in their reconstructed breast, which can make a monumental difference to their lives. And today, just by being part of this collective virtual group, we're supporting the purchase of specialized equipment for the breast reconstruction surgery unit at CMH. Offered right here at home, reconstruction is an option for many breast cancer patients, and it's conducted by a talented team of general surgeons and cosmetic surgeons who work together and are often able to perform the same day breast removal and reconstruction using a woman's own tissue. Breast cancer continues to be the leading cancer diagnosis for Ontario women, accounting for 13% of all reported cancer cases. In Waterloo Region alone, more than 600 new cases are reported annually. So thank you so much for your continued support. And with that sobering reminder of the incredible contribution you're making and to the needs of our community, we're going to shift to maybe something a little brighter. And so I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker. Sherry Roberts is a busy mom to a 13-year-old son, as well as an advocate for the disabled. She sustained a complete spinal cord injury in a car crash at age 18. After completing her BA in economics down the road at McMaster, she spent the next number of years getting knowledge and educating others on disability issues. She has a special ability, which you're about to see, to engage with and captivate an audience with her down-to-earth approach. She is an open book and is willing to speak on each and every component of her life as a woman, a mother, an athlete, all living with a disability. Through hard work, determination, and the harnessing of the resiliency skills that she had developed as a result of the challenges she faced as a child, Sherry Roberts was able to move forward following that car crash that changed the trajectory of her life. However, her journey is not one that she has traveled alone. Having support every step of the way was crucial to a successful recovery. So let's join Sherry as she tells her story and speaks to the importance of supporting and including others in our close circles and in the community as a whole, and how this varies.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So yes, I'm here to tell you my story. There's really nothing in life that can truly prepare you to hear the words, "You are paralyzed for life." But I believe that the challenges that I faced throughout my life, my childhood, taught me perseverance and how to be resilient in the face of hardships. That resiliency is what has given me the strength to not only live life after spinal cord injury, but to thrive. But I certainly didn't go at it alone. It took an army of support surrounding me every step of the way to allow me to live the beautiful life that I have over the last 24 years. My name is Sherry Roberts, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about my story and how important support systems, both formal and informal, are in the lives of people living with obstacles. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Some lovely photos here for you to enjoy. I grew up, in a poor but happy household. I was the middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother. We were raised in a very strict Christian household, which likely contributed to some of my rebelling in my later years. I was one of those always bright but chatty kids, the typical report card being, Sherry would do so much better in school if she focused more on work and less on her social life. My mother's always said that I was pretty much born independent. Being the typical middle child, I was always taking care of myself and everyone around me. I was very close with my siblings growing up, especially my brother. We're less than 2 years apart in age. And growing up in that close-knit community that we did, we always had lots of kids around, meant that we were always, outside, exploring, having fun, and making those, 1980s memories that us kids had. I was also very close to my dad. I was, very into fishing and doing all the sort of less girly things growing up, I guess. My dad was big into genealogy. So I would do graveyard hunting with him. He would take me on these expeditions to go find headstones of old family members and things like that. So we made a lot of really awesome memories doing those things. Life was pretty good at this time, and I was blissfully unaware of the mental health struggles that my mother was having for most of my life. This unfortunately all came to a sudden and dramatic halt when I was 10 years old, and my brother was kidnapped by a car thief. He was returned to us within hours, unscathed, other than a little traumatized. But this set my mother off on a downward spiral, mental health wise. Next slide, please. So when I was 16, my mother was hospitalized for quite some time due to her uncontrolled bipolar disorder at this time. My older sister had already moved out, and my dad worked a lot. So I became the primary person basically running the household at the age of 16, taking care of my younger brother, paying bills, making sure there was food in the house. Between this and regular teenage stuff, I kind of went off the rails a little bit at this time, got really heavily into partying. Drugs and drinking, things like that became very important to me. My friends and my boyfriend were my priorities. I no longer really cared about school and other things that were important to me growing up. Next slide, please. So some of these not so great decisions led me to the night that changed my life forever. So November 29th, 1998, I was out with some girlfriends at a club. And met some guys that night, and they offered us a drive home from the club. My dad had worked for the police department for a number of years, so he taught me enough common sense to not get into a car with someone who was completely inebriated. So I had asked questions of the driver, are you okay to drive? He seemed fine. To be honest, I had been drinking a lot that night, so likely wasn't the greatest judge of what a drunk person looked like, unfortunately. And so the seven of us, there was 7 people, walked over to his car and figured out how we were all going to jam in there and fit into this little 4-seater car that he had. So I offered to sit on someone's lap in the back seat, and off we went. We were on the 403, and we were getting off at the next exit. My exit was a left-hand exit. I told the driver to get over into the left-hand lane. And at this time, he lost control of the car. The last thing I remember is the car shaking, kind of like that sensation when you're going up a roller coaster, just everything vibrating around you and not really knowing what's happening. I don't remember anything after this, but what did happen was the driver lost control of the car, hit the curb, and it was a curb, as you can see in this photo, with no median. There was nothing to stop us. And so we went right off the road, and the car flipped 7 times. And on one of those flips, I was ejected out the back window of the car. and landed face down in the ditch. And the guy whose lap I had been sitting on flew out the window as well, and he landed right on top of me. Remember, this was 1998, so nobody had cell phones. There was no way to call for help. Fortunately, there was a man who was driving home from working at the airport, and he was a security guard, and he actually did have like a car phone. So he had seen the car crash and called 911. The paramedics and police came, and I was taken to the hospital close by. On the way to the hospital, I flatlined, so they used the defibrillator, get my heart beating again. When I got to that hospital, they realized there was no way that they could handle the level of care that I was going to need. And so I was shipped off to a trauma center in Toronto, St. Mike's. It was about this time, about 3:30 a.m. that my parents were getting that dreaded call that me as a mom now pray all the time that I never, ever get a call like that, saying, get to the hospital immediately. Your daughter's been involved in this very serious car crash, and we don't think she's going to make it through the night. So I had sustained some very significant injuries. I had orthopedic injuries on my legs. I had compound fractures on both legs, tib, fib, femur. I broke my hip and pelvis. I broke 12 ribs, punctured both my lungs with broken ribs, broke my back in 2 places, broke my neck, had a closed head injury, but my most severe and significant permanent injury was a complete spinal cord injury at the T4 level. So I had no sensation or movement from the chest down. So I spent a number of weeks in the ICU. And earlier when we were speaking about the importance of medical care, I can't say enough about the incredible medical care that I received, especially from my nurses. I honestly owe my life to my nurses in the ICU. They were just so amazing. In fact, so much so that on just a couple days before Christmas in 1998, my parents were sat down by the doctor and said, we really don't think she's going to make it. I was getting worse and worse. I developed pneumonia. I ended up requiring a tracheostomy. I had to be hooked up to life support. I wasn't breathing on my own. I was losing so much blood. It was just awful. So my parents had to have these horrible conversations among themselves and my friends about, what kind of funeral would I like, or celebration of life? What would that look like? And, as a mom now, I think you think about these special monumental events in your kid's life, things like graduations and weddings and all these wonderful things you want to plan for your kids. And the last thing you ever want to think about is having to plan a funeral for your child. So, I feel horrendous that I put my parents through that to this day. But fortunately, on Christmas Day, I was given the most incredible gift one could be given. I was given this amazing nurse named Jane. We joked, we called her GI Jane because she was so tough and made me do things that I, sort of resented her for at the time. But now I'm so thankful that she had me pushing myself to get better, because from Christmas Day to New Year's Day, she got me to the point where I was able to be discharged from the ICU, and I was put down into a step down ward. And I basically in there had to learn how to breathe again using regular room air. That took a little while, a couple of days. And then I was finally off to rehab, where I spent the next 6 months learning how to use my new body. One important takeaway from my situation, I hope people understand, is that spinal cord injury doesn't mean you just can't walk, which is what I certainly thought prior to sustaining a spinal cord injury. Honestly, walking is the least of my worries most days. It's just one component of spinal cord injury. So many other things are affected: my circulation, sensation, skin integrity, bowel and bladder management, digestion, temperature control and sweating, blood pressure, and so many other bodily functions are affected by an injury to the spinal cord. And in rehab, I had to learn how to figure all that out, how to take care of myself, how to be independent as I possibly could be with this whole new body. Not to mention I had, the psychological stuff that I was dealing with. I'm an 18-year-old girl and my whole life is turned upside down. If more people understood the complexity of spinal cord injury, I think that would be really important and vital in the supporting of people living with this complex disability. And while I definitely don't recommend childhood trauma as a way to toughen people up, I do believe that some of the hardships that I faced growing up allowed me to really get up and keep going following my spinal cord injury. When I was in the ICU, one of the first things that I said to my mom, and by said, I meant write down on a piece of paper because I was intubated at the time, she was what now? So instead of saying, why me? And, having this pity party, I was like, what now? What's next? How do I keep moving? Like, how do I get out of this bed and get on with life? Next slide, please. So immediately when I was newly injured, my mom quit her job, moved to Toronto to be my caregiver while I was staying in rehab. Taking care of me really became her purpose at this time, and she thrived through that purpose. We would joke also, that my brother sort of became my legs at this time. If I wanted to go somewhere that wasn't accessible, he would come along and carry me where I needed to go. We got to be very close as he was so supportive and helped me so much. And I really didn't miss out on much thanks to him. Also, my friends were amazing. If we were going somewhere or doing something that wasn't accessible, they would never leave me behind. They've carried me up and down so many flights of stairs into super tiny washrooms and even onto the sand. For example, this photo is at one of my best friend's weddings in Jamaica. And there was no way she was missing out on me being part of that photo. So down onto the sand I went. And they just really didn't want me to feel sad or that I couldn't get into all the places that they were going. They were all and continue to be amazing. I've been friends with the same group of girls since we were in grade 5, so we really are more like sisters than friends. Luckily, due to improved accessibility and overall awareness, and the fact that as I'm getting older, I really don't like getting carried around anymore, they more often than not choose locations for us to get together that are fully accessible, even to the point of changing wedding venues or destination wedding locations to ensure that the place they've chosen is somewhere that I'm going to be comfortable and get around easily. They really are my people. Next slide, please. So in addition to my close girlfriends and family, peer support was one of the most crucial elements to my successful rehab and recovery. So I'm just going to grab a quick drink. So being introduced early on to a few key people who have lived with spinal cord injuries for some time was so important. Because really, who knows better about what it's like to live life with a certain set of circumstances and challenges than the people who live it every day. These people were vital in teaching me coping strategies and tips on how to manage in a very inaccessible world. I was first introduced to my peer support volunteer, my first one ever, while I was still in the ICU. So Jen is the beautiful brunette in the photo with me in the center there with the blue top and the white pants. She wheeled into the room in my ICU room and literally changed my life. We joke that we've been besties since I was on life support, which is true. And seeing how she was truly killing it at this thing called life gave me and my family such hope for my future. Since then, I've gone on to become a peer support volunteer. I actually ran the peer support program out of Toronto for a few years, which was wonderful. And I've really got to meet I've worked with countless newly injured women primarily and helped them in their recovery and learning how to live life after a spinal cord injury. Recently, I've been able to rekindle friendships with many of the women that I met through the peer support program. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been running virtual adapted workouts, and our group has grown to over 10 women in Canada and the US who use chairs. And my mom, she joins us. She had a double knee replacement just before the pandemic. So she's been working out with us every day too. And it's been an amazing way to stay active and keep connected with people who truly get what it's like to live life with a spinal cord injury. It was also through peer support that I was introduced to wheelchair sports. Next slide, please. So in the years since first being introduced to adapted sports, I've played high-level tennis and basketball for the province of Ontario. I've completed multiple long-distance bike rides and even finished a triathlon. One and done. I will never do one of those again. In recent years, I've taken up wheelchair curling. This combines my love of competition and strategy with my hatred for the winter. It's definitely making the cold, snowy season go so much faster. And I'm super hopeful that our clubs will be open up again soon. Thanks to the support of local sports clubs and businesses, I've been able to participate in so many different activities. The YMCA on Hespeler Road put a hand cycle in the spin room, and spinning became an obsession for me. It was one of the first times since my injury that I was able to get really winded from a workout, get my heart rate up, and actually sweat hard, because that's difficult to do when you have a high level spinal cord injury. Fitness trainers at the Y also met with myself and some of my physio friends to come up with adaptations to the exercises that they were doing in their group workouts, so that I and others with mobility challenges could participate in all the classes. It was awesome. Also, a photo here in the center is me doing my first hip hop class. One Movement Dance Studio downtown Galt offered adopted hip hop, which was super fun and challenging. Dawn Pavey from the Tour de Grand every year has been so incredible when it comes to supporting me and making sure that I'm comfortable and I can participate in the bike ride. He orders an accessible porta potty for me and meets me in the morning at the rest stop on the 50K ride route. So I can drop a backup chair there so that when I get to that ride route or get to that rest stop, I'm able to get off my bike, use the washroom, be comfortable with everybody else. These are just a couple examples of some of the supports that I've received from our community. I just love how inclusive our community is when it comes to helping people stay active. Next slide, please. So a few years after sustaining my injury, I got married, and a few years after that, I got pregnant. It took us over 3 years to get and stay pregnant. This had nothing to do with my injury, but I also have polycystic ovary syndrome. So this made things a little more complicated. Being pregnant with a spinal cord injury was challenging, to say the least. Everything from my blood pressure bottoming out, which led to 6 months of bed rest, to balance issues, having that big belly there, lugging that around, to complications transferring, even trying to use the washroom with that big belly in the way was affected. And the questions, the questions I got from people, things like, how are you going to take care of your baby? What if he runs away from you? What if he gets hurt and you can't help him? And my favorite, how did you even get pregnant? As challenging as being pregnant was in the early years were, my son is honestly my sidekick and my biggest ally. We literally have done everything together, traveling together, sports together. One of my favorite memories is every year we do the Terry Fox run together. When his dad and I separated a few years ago, him and I got even closer. And he's truly growing up with a special understanding for others. He's got a wonderful, empathetic spirit and isn't afraid to speak up and stand up for others. And I certainly get tons of support from him. Next slide, please. So the year before I got pregnant with Ben, I moved from Burlington to Cambridge. So I've been here for about 15 years now. I immediately got involved with accessibility projects in the city. So I've chaired or vice chaired the Cambridge Accessibility Advisory Committee for over 10 years. I was honestly welcomed by city staff, city council, regional council, and many residents in the city while I worked towards making the municipality more accessible and inclusive for all. One project that I'm especially proud of is the Stopgap Ramp project. You might have seen some of our beautiful, colorful ramps throughout the city. And we've been delivering them we're going on our 4th year now. So I brought the Stopgap Ramp project to the city, and we've fully funded the building and delivery of over 50 ramps to small businesses throughout the city of Cambridge. This project was supported by city staff and volunteers. I also brought the Forward Movement initiative to the city, which has changed our accessibility logo on any new or repainted parking lots. So you might have seen the new cool updated logos. That's the Forward Movement initiative that came to the city just a couple of summers ago. And this one is, it's just a little more vibrant and realistic, and one that represents people with disabilities as the active people that we truly are. Next slide. Thank you. All this to say, every day isn't perfect. It's far from it, believe me. I have tough days and they suck, but only with the continuous advocacy and encouragement by the different circles of support in my life have I been able to be successful in living a full and wonderfully productive life. Starting first with my inner circle, being my closest friends, my family, an incredible boyfriend I have. The next level being agencies, including my amazing job at the Independent Living Waterloo region, who I love, and they have supported me so much. And lastly, the outer level of support, being the community and the public. Every single person in my life has played an important role. As members of our business community, each and every one of you has the opportunity to give residents the support that they need to ensure that every person has the same opportunities. Things like making your business accessible, physically accessible, and through customer service policies, training your staff on how to best support people with disabilities, hiring people with disabilities, and lastly, something that you can do in your home, teach your kids about the importance of embracing differences in others. These are simple but profound steps to make this world a more welcoming and accessible place for all. And these actions let me know that you've got my back. Thank you.
Sherry, that was incredibly inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And, you know, this idea of forward movement is something that jumps out from your entire story as such an active, purpose-driven individual, you know, before or after a car accident. It's incredible to me. So we've got some questions here for you from the participants. Victoria has written, after suffering a spinal cord injury at such a young age, has that changed your perspective when it comes to parenting your son?
Yeah, certainly. I think it has. And not all in great ways. Let me tell you, I'm very protective in terms of like everything is a spinal cord injury waiting to happen, you know? So when he would be like jumping on a trampoline, I'd be like, oh, cringing and things like that. So I'm really working to try and minimize some of my anxieties around that kind of stuff. But in a good way, I think that he's been exposed to, you know, me, obviously, since day one. In fact, it was so funny when he was really little and he went to daycare. One of the first things he said is like, where's all the other mommies' wheelchairs? So I think he thought all moms used wheelchairs at first. And then just having that level of understanding about differences in others, I think is going to really play through as he grows up. And I already see it. You know, my boyfriend's son has a disability, and the way that Ben and him interact is incredible. And I think it's just, he's just grown up with that, and that just love of all people, I think, is already shining through him at the age of 13. So it's wonderful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So many more questions about that. But well, Deborah has asked here, as a society, do we still have a long way to go when it comes to improving accessibility?
Yes, Deborah, so far. You know, we have the AODA in place, and we have this lovely idea of 2025 having this fully accessible Ontario. That's not going to happen, unfortunately. And in cities like Cambridge, we really struggle because we have a lot of historic buildings. We have a lot of older places and things that are going to be tough to contend with when it comes to accessibility. But on the AAC, we're working in conjunction with things like our heritage committees to let them know that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, you can be accessible and keep things, you know, heritage. So for example, like the old post office, that is a beautiful example of something that's like in keeping with the heritage aspects, but also being accessible for all. But yes, we unfortunately still do have a long way to go. But I think we really have to start with the attitudinal stuff first. So once we get over people having sort of lowered expectations about what people with disabilities can and should do, then that's the first sort of hurdle. And once we get over that, then the other things are going to be much easier and come into place, I think, a little bit more simply, because changing minds is a lot harder than building a ramp, that's for sure.
If only it were as easy as building a ramp. That would be fantastic. You've got, I don't know if you're able to see them, Sherry, but you've got lots of love coming in on the chat. Connie writes, amazing story. You're such a great inspiration for so many. Thank you for sharing. Sue's writing, thank you for being so courageous and sharing your story and for challenging all of us to be more aware and supportive of others. You've really turned the room on, so thank you. We've got another question here from Ian, who writes, what advice can you offer someone who is faced with a sudden changing disability?
Sorry, I missed a little bit of that. Your internet just went a little glitchy.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Ian writes, he's asking here, what advice can you offer someone who is faced with a sudden life-changing disability?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to not be afraid to ask for help, because I know I was like, I've always been so independent for so long that I would struggle. I would struggle through things. And honestly, I still fight with that a little bit internally. So being, not ashamed to reach out for help is key, and making the connection with the right agencies in our community. So depending on what the disability is, there's likely an agency that focuses on that type of disability. So a huge part of my life was Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. It used to be called the Canadian Paraplegic Association. My parents were super wise and connected me with them. Well, they were the ones that connected me with the peer support program while I was still, in the hospital, in the ICU. So making those connections with the community supports is massive, because they're going to know where all the resources are. And that's what I do with my job now at Independent Living Waterloo Region. I'm a community resource coordinator. So I help to connect people with disabilities in the community with resources that are already out there to help them live their best lives. So 2 pieces of advice, ask for help and look to the agencies in our community for the supports available.
Thank you. So it goes back to that sort of closing thoughts that you had shared about, I think of it almost as ripples of network around you, family and friends, job professional, and then into the community itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sherry, this question really is just from me. It's not from the chat, but I would like your advice and counsel on the language that's best serving the needs of differently abled folks in our community. The language of diversity and inclusion really, really matters. So for instance, I recently learned the terrible racial history behind the term grandfathering. And so I'm moving away from ever using that in common parlance. What sort of language should we be using when it comes to folks that are differently abled or disabled, or however you describe?
Yeah. So for one thing, Rebecca, disabled is like not a bad word. I know people are nervous sometimes to say disabled or disability. It's not a dirty word. So that's okay. You can say that. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it. So there's a couple of schools of thought on it. So some people are all about person first language. So person with a disability, things like that. I personally think that disabled person is fine. So I think that also, when you're speaking with someone, taking the tone from them is important. So looking at the language that they're maybe using is a good way to understand like what type of language they're comfortable with. I have friends with spinal cord injuries that love to use certain slang terms that myself as a disability advocate kind of makes me cringe a little bit. But in terms of saying, disability or disabled person, completely fine. Yeah. I think what happens is when people try to be so PC or so aware of what the language they're using, it gets more awkward, and they almost lose their train of thought, or they can't really communicate very effectively. So the thing is, people with disabilities are people first. That's the thing. So just speak to them like you would anyone else. Taking your cues from them is a great strategy, I think.
Thank you, Sherry, and thanks for reducing my anxiety about saying the wrong thing. I would hate to offend. So with that, we're going to wrap up here for a short time. Thank you for sharing your story. Something, in closing here, Sherry, that really resonated with me is when you asked your mom, what now, not why me? And I think for all of us, regardless of circumstance, there's a really powerful lesson in that. And that thought of driving forward and how we can take agency. So really inspiring. And thank you for that.
Thank you. So
folks, we're going to take a very brief break now. So this section will close before we jump into after at 1:15, jumping in. You can hang out in the lobby and then join the third session once it goes live. And so we'll see you all soon. And thank you so much, Sherry.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
But welcome back, everyone. And we have a real treat here with our third speaker. Kim is the Executive Director of the Fiddlesticks Community Center, located right here in Cambridge. She has worked with Fiddlesticks for the past 20 years, and her previous roles have included working with Family and Children's Services of Waterloo Regions and an assessment and receiving facility for youth. And prior to that, with the Robert Thompson Youth and Family Center, a youth therapeutic treatment center located in the Simcoe, Muskoka area. She is married and has 3 adult children and 4 grandchildren. Kim's diagnosis with breast cancer in late 2017 came as a shock. There is no history of breast cancer in her family, and she's here today to take you through her cancer journey. Kim feels strongly that being treated in her own community made a significant difference in her treatment and recovery for both her physical and mental health. And so to tell you more about that, I'll pass it over to Kim directly.
Hi, everyone. As you know, my name is Kim Fowler, and I have been married for 35 years to my childhood sweetheart, who I've known for 48 years. We have 3 children, 4 grandchildren, and I'm happy to say that I'm 56, almost 57, and as aging is not a privilege everyone has, I look forward to every birthday. I was contacted by the Chamber a little while ago to ask if I would speak about my journey. And initially I was a little bit hesitant, but thought, well, you know something, it's something that I'm comfortable with, something that I speak about openly to others. And if this can in any way help the hospital foundation and Cambridge Memorial, earn funds for equipment so that other women can stay in Cambridge to have treatment, that is definitely something I wanted to do. 2 side effects that I have from chemotherapy are memory loss and some difficulty focusing. So I do have notes that I do rely quite heavily on. I found a number of strategies to help with this, and I hope you don't mind that I'll be referring to the notes. But, excuse me, in speaking with the Chamber staff, I thought that I would take you chronologically through my cancer journey. And at the end, I'm certainly open to any questions that anyone might have. In November of 2017, when I was 52 years old, I actually had a dream, and it was my dad who came to me in a dream and said, you know, Kim, you never did have that mammogram. And I woke up in the morning and I just kind of shook my head and chuckled, because my dad was always on me about safety and risk management, and that's kind of where I get my need for that from. So I booked my mammogram, and when I was there, I just had a suspicion that things were not going okay. I was told, well, don't get breast yet. I might need to redo the test. So as I was sitting in the room waiting, I heard someone make a phone call, and yes, I did repeat the test. And I thought, well, you know, that was fine. I'm probably reading too much into this situation. But, you know, it's my very first one. And the technician had a really good poker face. So I wasn't really able to tell whether or not that was normal to go back for a second look. So a week later, I had my follow-up appointment with my family doctor, who did not have a good poker face. So upon entering the room, he brought his assistant with him, and I'm not sure if it was for support for him in case I cried and he didn't know what to do, or support for me in case I cried and I didn't know what to do. So Dr. Johnson sat me down and said I had something called DCIS, which is ductal carcinoma in situ. So he explained from the report that he received that it appeared that I had very small cancerous cells in the ducts of my breast, and that he was going to refer me to a surgeon for further investigation. He was somewhat concerned that my reaction wasn't what he had anticipated, because I was kind of pretty calm. I think a little bit of shock, but I'm also a realist. And, you know, I asked, is this going to kill me? And he said, well, it's early going, so, you know, I'm pretty hopeful. So, you know, I left, went home from the appointment, told my husband, and, you know, he's pretty logical as well. So, you know, don't assume the worst. Then we called the kids and gave them the news. Their reactions were what you'd expect. They were upset, worried about how I was feeling, angry that it was happening to me, concerned about my future and their future. Then I actually left the house and went to one of the local schools, because we had an event that night, and I went to let the volunteers and staff know that I wasn't going to be able to come and help out. Looking back, a phone call to someone probably would have done it, but I don't think I was thinking straight at the time. So mid-December, I had my first appointment with my surgeon, and I met Dr. Cormier. Her initial recommendation from the scans that she saw was for a lumpectomy. She did book a biopsy, however, to confirm the mammography and the DCIS diagnosis by the radiologist, and also determine the type of cancer. The biopsy was not what I expected. It was my first experience, and definitely not my last, with the medical machinery beyond an X-ray at Cambridge Memorial. I've been very lucky with my health up until that point. I had to say that the size of the machine and the procedure itself was a bit intimidating and more than a little uncomfortable. The sounds that the machine made, you know, I had to have an incision, a small incision in the breast, and the biopsy needle was put in, a very loud clicking sound like a stapler, where they would trying to take pieces of tissue for samples. Because my cancer cells were so small, it actually took them 8 samples until they were able to actually procure something that they would be able to review. So my next appointment was later in December with Dr. Colin, and Dr. Colin confirmed that the type of cancer that I had was triple negative. So, you know, when you hear negative, you usually think, well, that's a good thing. So I really would have learned a lot pretty quickly. It turns out that this one was a really difficult cancer to treat. I don't know if there's any medical people in the room, but I'm going to try and explain triple negative cancer as I understand it. All cancers, including breast cancers, are fed by something. So the tumors grow and are fed by something. With breast cancer, you have estrogen, progesterone, and I'll give this up a little further. I'll come back to that. Anyway, this what it means is if you're triple, or if you're positive for estrogen or progesterone, then that means your cancer is fed by estrogen or progesterone. So that's a good thing if you're positive, because what can happen then is you could be given medication that blocks your tumor from being fed by the estrogen or progesterone. So unfortunately, my tumor did not have receptors for the estrogen or progesterone, so they didn't know what was feeding it, and therefore they couldn't medicate against it. So that was somewhat unsettling. I do have some experience with friends who had cancer and understood that they took long-term medication and that stopped their cancer from coming back. And unfortunately, that was not going to be happening for me. So the biopsy, after the biopsy and finding out what type of cancer I had, I was scheduled for my first surgery in mid-January. So in preparation for this surgery, I was introduced to yet another machine in the nuclear medicine area of the hospital. Prior to having the scan, I first had to have a dye injection, Smurf blue dye injection into the breast, and the scan and the dye that remained for a few days beyond the surgery was used as a tracer. So the purpose of the surgery was to remove and examine what's called a sentinel node. So that's the first node in the line of nodes coming from the breast, and it's a series of nodes under the arm. So if there was something in the sentinel node, then they would go to the next node in that series until they reached a spot that they found a node that did not have any cancer. I was very lucky that my sentinel node was actually clear. So this meant that I could be booked for my surgery, so for my next surgery. So I was booked and had a double mastectomy and reconstructive surgery in late February of 2018. I did request a full mastectomy just because I thought that it would lessen my risk. It certainly lessened my stress level because I knew that I would constantly be thinking about a reoccurrence in the other breast. So Murphy's Law was not on my side in many situations. So I just wanted to have the peace of mind that I would not have a recurrence in the other breast. And stress is bad for cancer patients. So on surgery day, I thought about what I did to prepare, and I thought I would be terrified, but I really wasn't. I feel that the doctors really did a fantastic job preparing me. I knew what I was going into. I understood what the surgical procedure was. They told me to do a little bit of research and look at some pictures and get a head start on becoming accustomed to what things might look like post-surgery. This is also how I decided on what surgery I would opt into. I had two options, was a mastectomy without reconstruction or a double mastectomy with reconstructive surgery. Initially, I wasn't going to have reconstruction, but after doing that research and looking at those pictures, I thought, I think I would rather not look at a non-reconstructed body every morning in the mirror. So going into surgery, being prepped is not like in the movies. I walked from the waiting room to the operating room waiting room, and that's where the doctors drew all over me with a Sharpie, which I kind of thought was interesting. I haven't looked at a Sharpie the same since. Then one of the doctors came in and changed some of the lines. I guess they had a difference in opinion, which was kind of a little bit, I chuckled a little bit. My surgery lasted approximately 5 hours and definitely was more difficult for those that were waiting. I slept through it, obviously. Dr. Colin, the general surgeon, is well known for a procedure that I had, which is called a skin sparing mastectomy. This leaves the most, excuse me, this leaves the most viable amount of skin possible to allow for immediate reconstructive surgery. So once Dr. Colin was done, Dr. Chesley moved into the lead position and completed the reconstruction using saline implants. And the surgery was quite a success, I have to say. An interesting time, however, is from the time of the initial an interesting point, from the time of my initial mammogram to the time of my mastectomy, which was just a little bit over 2 months, that small sample that took, the small ductal tumor or cancer specks that took 8 tries to get a sample that they were so small, had grown into a 1.8 centimeter tumor in my right breast. So the cancer that I had, the triple negative, was certainly aggressive. And I was really thankful at that point that I had opted for a full mastectomy. So recovery from a major surgery like this takes time. You have a lot to contend with. So you have drainage tubes, you're not able to lift your arms above a certain level for a long time, home care nurses, general exhaustion. And trying to convince my dogs that everything was okay was also something that was quite interesting. And also, as I'm someone who sleeps on my stomach, breast surgery was problematic. I had to sleep in a reclining chair for a number of weeks to avoid accidentally turning onto incisions. So in March, and here's where Murphy's Law comes in, I noticed that something didn't quite look right through the clear bandaging that was across my incisions, and I contacted Dr. Chesney, who's the reconstructive surgeon. Turns out that my left side was suffering from what's called necrosis, which means the skin was dying. So Dr. Chesney treated the skin to stop the spread of the necrosis, and at that same time scheduled an additional surgery that I had in March to remove that dead area. The point of that was to ensure that I didn't have a massive scar. So I was very thankful that they opted to do that surgery, because I think every day looking at the size of the scar that would have been left from if that dead skin had not been removed would have been very emotional and hard for me. That was my third surgery for the corrective tissue. So after that surgery, we were looking forward to when I would start chemotherapy. So people often have asked me, well, if you had a double mastectomy and there was nothing in your node, why did you have to have chemotherapy? Well, with most cancers, if one cell, just one cell, gets away, it is very problematic and can spread and metastasize. So in preparation for my surgery, and I think that some pictures are going to be put back up. I opted to prepare myself for what I think I would have to see the most every day, which was the change in my hair. So I started off with, I had long hair, as you can see in the pictures. I have a wonderful hairdresser who came to my house actually and gave me a nice little short cut. You can see that in the plaid shirt picture. And I know with Murphy's Law that, the multiple haircuts was probably the better thing to do, because I was pretty sure that I was going to lose the hair. And Murphy's Law has been a part of my life. So I was right. I did end up losing my hair. And I think there's another picture that is going to be put up where you can see that I definitely had an okay shaped head. So remembering Murphy's Law, I want you to keep in mind that I'm a huge hockey fan. So shortly after my appointment to book my surgery with Dr. Chesney, I actually ended up in the emergency department as I woke up with an excruciating pain in my left shoulder. My husband didn't doubt that it was pretty significant because I opted to go to Emerge over attending my very first in-person Leafs game. As a cancer patient, I have to say that the hospital at Cambridge Memorial is absolutely amazing, and they certainly do prioritize cancer patients. They want to see you when there are any unusual or significant changes in symptoms. So I went in, and after several tests, an MRI, one of those amazing machines at the hospital again, and x-rays, a cancer spread was ruled out, and it turned out that sleeping in that awkward position in the reclining chair had caused a nerve impingement. This was good news, although the pain was so severe that when I went into the necrosis surgery, they had to actually give me the medication to start to put me out while I was still sitting up. So now, move on into April, and I've had the double mastectomies. They're complete. The reconstruction is done, and the necrosis is dealt with, and all was healing as expected. So we ramped up to start chemotherapy. I've always had an issue with poor veins, so I opted for a short little surgery to install a port. So a port is actually, I actually have it here. Don't worry, it's not close. So this is a port, and this was put under the skin here on my left side, and this lead was run into a main artery that went right into my heart. So this was used, or was to be used, for chemotherapy medication to be given to me when I went to the chemotherapy suite in medical daycare. So remember Murphy's Law? So unfortunately, I suffered a complication during the surgery, and it resulted in my having a collapsed lung. So my left lung collapsed. I woke up from that surgery in a significant amount of pain, and after waiting in post-op for a few hours to see if the situation would correct itself, a decision was made to admit me. I had to have a chest tube inserted, and I was admitted and stayed in the hospital for 5 days. I don't like to say that I'm a difficult patient, but it took longer than most people expected for the chest tube to finally create an environment that allowed my lung to inflate. So after I was taken or discharged from hospital, I started chemo that week, and the staff on the chemo suite at the hospital are absolutely amazing. The nurses and pharmacists showed such compassion to myself and everyone that was there. I had chemotherapy alternate weeks, and between treatments, I had to have a needle every day for 10 days. So I actually didn't, if I didn't take the needles to build up what's called a neutrophil count, I would have had to wait 3 weeks between treatments, which is not the optimal for triple negative cancer. Neutrophils are kind of a type of the white blood cell that make up the largest number of blood cells. They kill and digest bacteria and fungus to let your body fight infections. So obviously it was important to have those levels high before hitting the immune system chemotherapy. So without any additional medical coverage, these injections would have cost about $200 per dose, but fortunately there's a grant system to assist with the cost of any dose. And that information is provided to myself and my husband through the medical daycare doctors. The injections are to be self-administered in the stomach. My husband did mine. And as well, before you have each chemo treatment, you have to look at the day prior. And that is to determine that your neutrophil levels are high enough to handle the chemotherapy. Additionally, you have to take some pretty strong steroids prior to having the chemotherapy, and that medication is taken in the morning. It really does, heats you up. Your face is extremely red. You sweat, or at least I did, and I think that's the experience of a lot of patients who have to take these steroids prior to treatment. My first treatment was emotional, although I held it together fairly well. A day later, I was fine, but after that, a day after that, I was pretty wiped out and spent a couple of days in bed. I was happy that I still had my hair after the first treatment. Would I escape Murphy's Law finally? Well, a few days after my second treatment, the hair began to fall out. And although I had cut it very short, as you saw from the pictures, there were balding spots when I woke up on day 3 after my second treatment. So I got out my husband's shaver, called him upstairs, and had him shave my head bald. I felt better being in control of the hair loss. And it turns out that my head shaped pretty well after all. So as time went on, the reaction to each of my chemos varied. The first 4 seemed to be the easiest of them. Lack of appetite, no energy, weight loss, but nothing too significant. I am an avid camper, and when I say camper, I'm actually a glamper. So I asked after one of my treatments if I could go to Algonquin and do my recovery there, and not going to be out finding the dirt. So I have an RV. So the doctor gave me permission to rest and relax excuse my dog, in Algonquin. Unfortunately, I had caught an infection before we headed up camping, and unknown to us, it got to the point after a few days that I had to come home. So my husband just got us in the truck, drove me home, and took me to the doctor. Seemed fine. There no fever, but came back home on the Friday and just went to bed. But by Sunday, I did spike a fever and ended up in the hospital. Fevers are a significant issue for cancer patients who are in the middle of chemo treatment because your ability to fight infection is quite diminished. And unfortunately, I had ended up with 3 infections in total. So I was put into isolation. The first 4 days, I slept for about 20 of 24 hours, but after that, I actually felt okay. The stubborn fever just wouldn't go away, and they couldn't find the right antibiotic to get rid of the last infection. They did manage to get rid of 2 of the 3, and but I ended up staying 17 days before my fever finally broke, and they were able to start to knock out the last infection. So I was sent home with a prescription, and the pharmacist refused to fill it initially, thinking that there was an error. So my husband directed me to call the hospital for confirmation. Many weeks on this antibiotic, and I finally felt well. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay on my chemo schedule when I was ill, and it took some time to build my neutrophil levels back up. So having gaps in my treatment, well, that's quite concerning for me. I was really worried with the cancer catch up. It was a lot of work to go through all of that chemotherapy to then have to worry that things would not go well. So it wasn't lost on me or my family, and infections like the combination that I had could easily have ended up with the phrase of, I died of complications from breast cancer. There are many complications, and significant infections like that are very, very scary, I guess is the best way I can say it. I was so fortunate to have an amazing team of doctors in my own hometown. After recovering from the infections, I carried on with my treatments on a fairly regular basis and did everything I could to regain some of the strength and endurance. In the end, I had to put off 2 additional treatments due to those low neutrophils. So I ended up completing treatment in the last week of August rather than in the middle of July. Our community center runs a camp called Lead, and it is my favorite week of the entire year. It's something that I attend every year. And so my last treatment was supposed to be in mid-July. When I found out that that wasn't going to happen as planned, I asked permission to do this overnight camp. And the oncology team said that I was able to do it. So my treatment that was scheduled for Thursday, they moved to Friday. I popped back on Thursday, had my blood work done, went back to camp, and came back to have my final treatment on August 23rd. So in I go, all excited, last treatment, August 23rd. The doctor in charge of the clinic comes in and says, your blood work came back and we can't do the treatment. The neutrophil levels are still low. So I just kind of closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Up until then, I'd been pretty easygoing about all that had happened, but this was, I think, just a little too much of Murphy's Law. I'm sure if you spoke to anyone who knows me well, I would describe as a very determined and resourceful person. So the doctor was a little shocked when I looked at him and I said with a slight laugh that it was okay if they needed to admit me, give me prophylactic antibiotics or tell me that I had to stay in bed for 10 days after the last treatment, but that I wasn't going to leave until I had this. So could he call the head of oncology? Looking back, must have seemed like I'd lost my mind, but was so thankful that he listened and he called the head of oncology, and my levels were just slightly low, and Dr. Chouinard gave him permission to give me this treatment. So I kind of look at what I think about now. I think of the side effects and the scars. They're a daily reminder of what I've been through, definitely. I have what's called neuropathy in my hands and feet. So I feel like I'm walking in sand all of the time. I have memory loss. I have difficulty focusing. My hands don't quite grip like they used to, but I'm here and I'm very thankful for that. Other things that I've thought about as well is I look at scars every morning when I wake up and I get changed. And for the men in the room, sorry if this makes you uncomfortable, but I opted not to have a reconstruction of the nipples tattooed onto my breast. I thought I would really remind my kids and have some fun and get some floral or some sort of nature related tattoo done. I never would let them get tattoos until they were 18. So I thought I would cover my scars with something that would not just cover the center of the scar. But as it turns out, it doesn't bother me at all. And I never did get any tattoos. So thinning hair, for a woman that can be difficult, but you know, it might be thinner. But the bonus was my hair was a lot more gray before I had chemotherapy. I don't dye it, and I have more brown than I have gray, which was not the case for those who knew me before chemotherapy. My hair was much brighter. I definitely don't have the same strength that I had before. But what the kids at the center used to call me a tank, so maybe I'm just average now. I think the most significant thing for me though was my memory loss. My memory was better than average prior to chemo, so I really do have to find ways to mitigate that issue, and that does cause me a significant amount of stress. Something else that is on my mind is that there is a 40% rate of metastatic breast cancer with triple negative cancer. I don't think about that on a regular basis, but you know, I don't want it to occupy much of my time. I try to look forward and know that I'm being closely monitored. I was very lucky that just last week I finished my last cancer-related treatment. Although there isn't medication to treat triple negative cancer, the oncology team sourced out clinical trials that I've been participating in since the fall of 2018. One trial ended early as the results were not deemed significant. However, the Zometa infusion trial is still ongoing, and I just had my last treatment. And my understanding is that there is some evidence that it might bring the percentages of recurrences down from 40 to about 35%. So this gives me a hope that I may play a small part in helping to find treatments for future triple negative breast cancer patients. Excuse me. One thing that was really important to me, and I think had a significant impact on me emotionally, was knowing some of the staff, because they live in the community. And that made my first day walking into the chemo suite really much less stressful. As it turns out, one of the volunteers from Fiddlesticks was the head nurse in the chemo suite of the medical daycare area. You know, it was so comforting to see a familiar face. You know, another appointment that I had for a breast ultrasound, I found myself in the room with an ultrasound technician who was the mom of a young girl who was a member of the Fiddlesticks Girls Choir. So that kind of familiarity, isn't going to happen in a hospital outside of your own city. And that comfort that it brought, really, it can't be measured. Seeing other community members come in and with their family members allowed me to easily talk with them about the journey that I was going through. And I was able to tell them how fortunate we are to have a hospital that can manage our treatment. You know, having close friends who've gone through a similar journey 3 years before me, they had such positive messages to me about the hospital and the staff, and it really helped me trust that they were doing and giving me the best advice for my treatment. You know, through the journey, I realized some important things about our hospital and about the hospital foundation. I actually didn't know that our community was responsible for raising funds for equipment in the hospital. I don't think a lot of people do know that. I think most people are under the impression that the government supplies the CT machines and the x-rays and ultrasounds and surgical equipment, and this isn't the case, and that was actually quite shocking for me. The Cambridge Memorial Hospital Foundation does an amazing job raising funds to keep patients in their own city for treatment. I can't tell you how much it meant to me to be able to go home to my own bed after each and every treatment that I had. You know, in the 9 months of treatment that I went through, I only had to leave Cambridge once for a test. And that was, I went to the hospital in Guelph, and it was just for an MRI machine that we didn't have that specifically was for breasts. I think that being in my own community without a doubt contributed to my emotional health during such a devastating time in my life. I can't express my gratitude enough to the people who contribute to the Cambridge Memorial Hospital Foundation to help them, to help our hospital continue the amazing quality of care that I received. This was the most stressful year in my life. Even with COVID, 2019 was definitely the worst. For any women in the room, I just want to say, don't put off a mammogram. Early detection is key. It was key for me. Please know that if you're diagnosed with breast cancer, that you have an amazing team and amazing equipment at our hospital. You'll find the strength and determination to navigate this diagnosis and all that comes with the journey that follows. Lean on your friends and other survivors. You'll have anxiety and fear and emotions, and at times it can be overwhelming. But those friends and survivors are the best cheerleaders you will ever have, and they will give you such hope for the future. I didn't realize how brave I could be until this diagnosis. Stubborn, I knew, but brave, I was surprised. You'll also find the strength in those people who support you, and they will help you in it. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm really quite blown away. You suggested that you have slightly less strength than you did before the cancer. And I would actually say, from what you've indicated here in the story you've shared, you've got a whole lot of strength, lady. Just maybe not in grip. So we've got a couple of questions here on the chat. One from Lisa McLean, not Ian, my mistake before. Kim, how has your cancer battle changed your perspective on the way you look at life?
I think that I tend not to put things off. Unfortunately, with COVID, I've had to put a few things off. One thing I didn't mention during this is that I actually was a terrible smoker, so embarrassed to say that, for like 40 years. And obviously I quit, 38 years and I quit. So during my cancer treatment, I quit, but I used to spend $70 a week on smoking. So I put that money away. And so my whole around the perspective and how things changed, I never really wanted to travel before. It wasn't a big thing for me. But all of a sudden it was like, you know what? I think that I want to travel. So unfortunately, COVID hit before I saved up enough to go anywhere. But I have anyone who still smokes, 3.5 years later, I have $13,000 to go on a trip. So quit smoking and save up your money. So yeah, I'm not putting things off if I can do them. So post-COVID, I'm sure there's going to be lots more that I will do.
Well done on the quitting smoking. That's a feat in and of itself too.
Cold turkey. Yep.
So we've got a question from Anonymous here. What advice would you give on how to best support a loved one going through cancer?
Let them cry if they need to. Don't try and solve it. You can't. Just be there. If they need to sit and talk about it, then let them talk about it. If they don't want to talk about it, don't talk about it. One thing I will stress, and this has happened to me so many times, and I'm not sure how I'm going to address it. I have to find a way to address it because I think people need to know. Don't talk about people who have died from breast cancer that you know. I have had so many conversations where someone has heard that I've had breast cancer, and by the end of the conversation, they're talking about someone who died from it. And all people who have breast cancer, there is a chance that it will metastasize. You know, you can go 10, 15 years and still come back and have your breast cancer metastasize. So as a loved one, don't talk about your great aunt who didn't make it. Just talk about all the positive things and all the people that you know that have made it.
Kim, thank you. I think that's a pretty pithy reminder and actually answers Deborah's question here, which is, what's the one thing you don't want people to say? Well, we heard it.
Yeah, and they don't realize, you know, they don't mean to kind of put that thought in your head for the next 3 days. But yeah, that's the one thing you don't want someone to say.
Got it. So the last question here on the Q&A board is, what was your biggest self-discovery or revelation after you were diagnosed?
Biggest revelation, I think really I was a lot stronger than I thought I would be. I really was. At first I thought it was shock, and that, you know, at some point I was going to just lose it. I cried, I think, 3 times. I didn't even cry on the way to the hospital for the double mastectomy, which I found strange. I thought, well, geez, that's really weird. I think that the doctors had just done such a great job explaining why this was important. And, you know, again, if there's any guys on the call, it's non-functioning equipment anymore. I don't really need it. So, you know, not having it anymore wasn't a huge deal. The reconstruction kind of helped. Like when I'm dressed, you would never know. Even if I was wearing a bathing suit, you would never know. You just have to get on with it. You know, it's life. And my biggest thing was I kept thinking when I was in chemo, if I started to kind of feel a little bit down or sorry for myself, I just looked around and I thought, oh, please don't let a child walk in here. Because I wouldn't be able to deal with that, seeing a child sit down and have that needle put in. So that was my kind of check and balance, to just realize that I'm a very fortunate person, and I would just stronger than I realized.
And it's jumping off the screen at us, Kim. You're going to look at some point and see all the love that's pouring in on this chat on the right-hand side. You've got a lot of fans in Cambridge, and rightfully earned. But, you know, some of the things that have really struck me about your messages, and when we think about how it ties into what we were hearing from our other 2 speakers, is this sense of forward looking and reflection of gratitude and searching for pragmatism, but also for the support and love of our community, whatever that means to us, of neighbors and friends. But also, in particular, something that jumped out is our very first speaker, Kelly Lee, spoke about how important it is to listen to your inner voice. And she actually had a story about a voice giving her some guidance. And the same as you said with your dad's voice saying, hey, you never did get that mammogram. And so I think that's one of the big things I'm taking away from today, is the importance of finding that peace and space to listen to that inner voice as a way of following your best path. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that jumps out is just how incredibly blessed we are with having Cambridge Memorial Hospital in our community. And it's incredible, you know, the subtext, and you already hit upon it, is how well I think the doctors and surgeons and the nurses and all of those healthcare workers had supported you, that you understood what that path forward looked like, and to reduce that anxiety somewhat, given a very anxiety-ridden circumstance, is a real gift. So it's exciting to think about how your participation today is with the group here that's on the line, is helping to give back to that Cambridge Memorial Hospital. So thank you so much for sharing, and please do check out your love notes.
Will do. And I just wanted to say, you know, if there's anyone on this call who is going through or knows someone who's going through, you know, breast cancer, you know, and they don't have somebody that is healthy and working, you know, toward recovery, please connect with the chamber and they can give you my contact information if you need someone. I was so fortunate to have a very close friend who had gone through this journey, and it was so important to me to have her. It's kind of a mentor, actually. It sounds silly, but it was very helpful, and I would do that for anyone. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. And we're going to wrap up now. I can't believe it's 4 minutes to the hour, and it's hard to believe that this time has flown past as quickly as it has. But before we go, I wanted to give a special thanks to all of our sponsors today. We couldn't do this without you. And for all of us as participants, just by being part of today's events, you've helped raise $7,725 towards the breast reconstruction unit at the Cambridge Memorial Hospital. And we've just heard from Kim exactly kind of the kind of work they're doing there and how much it's helping our friends and neighbors. So we offer a special thanks to you and everyone that has helped us reach this big goal. And now we're going to be announcing the winners of some door prizes. And Caitlin from the Chamber is going to be in touch with you to help arrange the logistics and pickup. But first off, the winners of our $10 Zoop gift certificates are Trick Fletcher, Rosie Haggins, Sarah Wong, Joan Frisk, Brian May, Tanya Masters, Sabrina McGregor, Sue Lockett, Kelly Culver, and Jenna Robertson. And the winner of the Farm Boy gift basket is, drumroll, Darlene Benedict. And next we have this Fashion Fierce neck piece that flaunts a stunning feather Swarovski crystal. The pendant is studded with them, and with sensational abalone shell and classic mother of pearl suspended from a sleek 20-inch designer chain and Fifth Avenue collection matching earrings. This also includes a free dynamic assessment worth $225, courtesy of Oxford Learning Cambridge. And the winner of this big prize is, drumroll, Sarah Hughes. And finally, the winner of the overnight stay at the Cambridge Hotel and Conference Center with breakfast for two and a $100 gift card to the Bruce Craft House is Donna Reed. So thank you again to Kelly Lee, to Sherry, and to Kim. You've shared so much with us today and have really done a large part to inspire the women in business in the Cambridge area. And before we go, we all understand that a coffee break means so much more than a cup of that powerful brew. And coffee breaks are really a time to kick back and to relax and cool down a little bit and recharge for what's coming next. So Graham Matthew wanted to give you all that recharge. You will be receiving a $5 electronic gift card to Tim Hortons within the next 15 minutes. So check your spam folder if you don't find it by, I guess, 2:30. And thank you, Graham Matthew, for working with us at the Chamber to achieve our goals. And thank you again to all of our sponsors and to everyone for attending today and supporting the Cambridge Memorial Hospital. Have a great day.